I'm not here to marry, sir. I just want to cook.
I'm not here to marry, I just want to cook, she declared, and the rancher's words shocked the whole town. You're going. Margaret looked up from the sink, her hands dripping soapy water onto the floor. Her brother Thomas stood in the doorway, newspaper in hand, his face set in that expression she knew too well. The one that meant he'd already decided, and nothing she said would change it. Thomas, I don't. Thornhill Ranch is hiring a cook for the bunkhouse crew. 30 men. $30 a month plus room and board. He tossed the paper onto the table. You're going to apply. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron, her throat tightening. They won't hire someone like me. They'll hire someone who can cook. And you can cook better than anyone in this town. His voice wasn't kind. It was factual, the way he spoke about lumber prices or weather. We're 3 weeks behind on rent, Margaret. The landlord won't wait forever. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that she'd seen the way people looked at her when she walked through town. The whispers. The turnbacks. But Thomas was already pulling on his coat, already moving toward the door. The ranch is 5 miles south. Be there by noon. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. And don't stutter when you talk to him. Just cook. The door closed behind him, and Margaret stood alone in the small kitchen that had become her entire world. She looked down at the newspaper, at the smudged ink that spelled out her next humiliation or her only chance. She couldn't tell which. By the time she'd washed her face and changed into her least worn dress, the sun was already climbing. The walk to Thornhill Ranch would take over an hour, and she'd need every minute to convince herself not to turn back. Margaret stopped at the general store to ask directions. The moment she stepped inside, 3 women by the counter turned to look at her. She recognized them. Everyone recognized everyone in a town this small. Margaret, one of them said, her voice syrup-sweet. What brings you out so early? I'm looking for Thornhill Ranch. The women exchanged glances, and something in their eyes shifted. Amusement. Anticipation. Thornhill Ranch? Another repeated. Whatever for? I'm applying for the cook position. The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Then one woman covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. Another turned away, pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. The bunkhouse cook, the first woman said slowly, as if tasting the words. For 30 ranch hands. That's ambitious of you, Margaret. Very ambitious, another agreed. Those men work hard. They'll expect someone who can keep up. Margaret's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. Which direction is the ranch? One of them pointed south, still smiling. 5 miles down the main road. You can't miss it. Good luck, dear. You'll need it. Margaret left the store with their laughter following her into the street, and she walked faster, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd heard worse. She could survive this. Thornhill Ranch stretched across the valley like something out of a painting. Fences lined the hills, cattle dotted the pastures, and at the center of it all stood a large main house and, just beyond it, a long bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney. Near the bunkhouse was a separate building, smaller, with a wide porch and windows that overlooked the workyard. The cookhouse. Margaret's stomach twisted as she approached the main house. She knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. The man who stood there was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in years. Callum Thornhill. She recognized him from town, though they'd never spoken. Yes. His voice was low, rough from shouting orders across wide fields. I'm here about the cook position. For the bunkhouse. He looked her over, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside. Come in. The house was neat but plain, the kind of home built for function rather than comfort. He led her through to the kitchen, gestured for her to sit, and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. "You've cooked for large crews before?" "No, sir. But I've managed a kitchen. I know how to plan meals, how to stretch supplies, and I don't waste food. 30 men eat a lot. Breakfast at 5. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 7. No exceptions. I can do that." He studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself not to look away. Finally, he pushed off the counter and opened a cupboard, pulling out flour, eggs, salt. "Cook something. Now." Margaret stood, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She made biscuits, the kind her mother had taught her before she died. Simple. Perfect. She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the way her heart hammered in her chest. When the biscuits came out of the oven, golden and steaming, she set one on a plate and handed it to him. Callum Thornhill took a bite, chewed slowly, then took another. "You start tomorrow. 5 in the morning. Don't be late." Margaret blinked. "You're hiring me? You got a problem with that?" "No, sir." "Callum. Just Callum." He set the plate down and walked toward the door. "The cookhouse is next to the bunkhouse. You'll have your own room attached. Meals are provided, and Sundays are your day off." He paused at the door, his back to her. "The men can be rough. If they give you trouble, you tell me." Then he was gone. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of fresh biscuits still hanging in the air, and for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. That evening, Margaret moved her few belongings into the small room attached to the cookhouse. It was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch. She could hear the men in the bunkhouse, their voices carrying through the walls. Laughter. The sound of boots on wooden floors. She lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, and whispered into the quiet, "Just cook. That's all you have to do. Just cook." Outside, the sun set over the hills, and somewhere in the main house, Callum Thornhill sat by the fire with a little girl curled up beside him, asking him questions about the stars. The first morning, Margaret woke before dawn and started the stove. 30 men. 3 meals a day. She'd done the math a dozen times, planned every dish, every portion. Biscuits, bacon, eggs, gravy, coffee strong enough to strip paint. She worked fast, her hands moving through the familiar motions, and by the time the men started filing in at 5, the food was ready. They came in loud and hungry, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Then they saw her, and the noise died. Margaret kept her eyes on the serving table, dishing out plates, refilling coffee. The men took their food in silence, exchanging glances. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting at the far end of the table. One man, older than the rest with a graying beard, took a bite of biscuit. Chewed. Then grunted. "Not bad." Another nodded. "Better than the last cook." The tension broke, and the men went back to eating. Margaret exhaled slowly, her hands shaking as she refilled the gravy boat. Over the next few days, the men started talking to her. Mostly requests. More coffee. Extra biscuits. But sometimes, when they thought she wasn't listening, she heard the comments. "Boss must have been desperate. At least she can cook. Better her than me having to do it." It wasn't vicious, not like the women in town. But it still stung. Margaret kept her head down and focused on the work. The food was good. That was what mattered. On the third day, Margaret was kneading dough when she heard light footsteps on the porch. She looked up, and there in the doorway stood a little girl with dark curls and eyes too serious for someone so small. "Hello," Margaret said softly, wiping her hands on her apron. The girl didn't run, just stood there watching. "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded. Margaret pulled a stool up to the work table and patted it. "Come sit. I'll make you something." The girl climbed up, her legs swinging. Margaret shaped a small piece of dough into a ball, showed her how to flatten it with her palms, then brushed it with butter and sprinkled cinnamon and sugar on top. "What's your name?" Margaret asked as she slid the little treat into the oven. "Emma." "I'm Margaret. Do you live here?" "With my papa. In the big house." Margaret's chest tightened. Callum's daughter. When the cinnamon roll came out of the oven, golden and sweet, Emma's eyes went wide. Margaret set it on a plate, let it cool, and handed it to her. Emma took a bite, and for the first time, she smiled. "It's really good." "I'm glad." Emma ate slowly, savoring every bite. Then she looked up at Margaret with those big, serious eyes. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Margaret's throat ached. "If your papa says it's all right." "He will." Emma hopped off the stool, clutching the last piece of her treat. "Thank you, Miss Margaret." She ran out the door before Margaret could respond. That evening, Callum appeared at the cookhouse door just as Margaret was cleaning up. "My daughter says you gave her something to eat." Margaret froze. "I'm sorry, I should have asked." "It's fine." His voice was gruff, but not angry. "She hasn't smiled like that in a long time." "Thank you." He left before she could say anything else. Emma came back the next day. And the day after that. She'd sit at the work table, asking questions while Margaret cooked. "Why do you put salt in sweet things?" "Because it makes the sweetness stronger." "Why does butter melt?" "Because heat changes it." "What's your favorite thing to cook?" "Bread." "Because you can see it grow." Emma watched everything, her small hands sometimes helping, sometimes just resting on the table as she listened. She told Margaret about the ranch, about the horses, about how her papa worked all day and sometimes forgot to eat. And one afternoon, while they were shaping cookies, Emma said quietly, "My mama died when I was 2. Margaret's hands stilled. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "I don't remember her." "Papa says she was in an accident." Emma looked up, her eyes shining. "Do you think she would have taught me to cook like you do?" Margaret's vision blurred. She knelt down beside Emma's stool and took her small hands in hers. "I think she would have loved teaching you everything. And I think she'd be so proud of the girl you're becoming." Emma threw her arms around Margaret's neck, and Margaret held her, something breaking open in her chest that she hadn't known was closed. That evening, Callum came to the cookhouse to check on something, and he stopped in the doorway. Emma was sitting on Margaret's lap, giggling as Margaret told her a silly story about a chicken who thought it was a cow. Emma's laughter filled the small space, bright and unguarded. Callum stood there, frozen, watching. When Margaret looked up and saw him, she went still, suddenly afraid she'd overstepped. But Callum's expression wasn't angry. It was something else. Something softer. "Emma, time for bed," he said quietly. Emma pouted but slid off Margaret's lap. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "If Miss Margaret doesn't mind." Margaret smiled. "I never mind." After Emma left, Callum lingered in the doorway. "She talks about you constantly." Margaret's cheeks flushed. "She's a wonderful child." "She is." He paused, his jaw working. "Her mother died when she was too young to remember. I've tried to be enough for her, but the ranch, I don't have the time she needs." "You're doing your best." Callum looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment something passed between them. Something unspoken. "Thank you," he said finally, "for seeing her." Then he was gone, and Margaret stood alone in the cookhouse, her heart doing something strange and unfamiliar in her chest. Weeks passed, and Margaret's cooking became the heartbeat of the Thorne Ranch. The men stopped whispering and started boasting. When they rode into town for supplies, they bragged about her biscuits that melted in your mouth and stews that could raise the dead. Word spread. Merchants at the general store began stocking the supplies she requested. Even the sheriff, who'd once smirked at her arrival, started tipping his hat when she passed. The same women who'd laughed at her sighs that first day now went quiet when she entered the mercantile, their mouths twisting with envy. But good rumors always travel with bad ones. The ranch grew busier as summer deepened, and with the work came new hands, young men with quick tongues and quicker tempers. They joked crudely when she wasn't within earshot, or thought she wasn't. "Big woman like that cooking for the boss every night?" One snickered. Another spat tobacco into the dirt. "Reckon she's doing more than cooking." The laughter that followed was sharp and ugly. Margaret heard it one morning through the open kitchen window. Her hands froze over the biscuit dough, her breath catching. She pressed her palms into the counter until the sting in her chest dulled to something numb. Then she kept working. But it spread. In town, 2 women outside the dress shop whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Living alone with a widower? Not even married. She's making herself quite comfortable, isn't she?" Margaret carried her flour sack to the wagon, pretending not to hear. Her face burned. By the next week, laughter followed her like a shadow. When she stepped outside to hang laundry, she could feel the ranch hands' eyes. Some pitied her. Others smirked. Even Emma noticed. "Miss Margaret," she said one afternoon, "why do people stare at you in town?" Margaret's hands stilled on the dough. "Sometimes people judge others by how they look on the outside instead of who they are inside. That's not fair." "No, it's not." Emma frowned, then reached for her hand. "I think you're beautiful." Margaret's throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart." The girl grinned. "And you make the best cookies in the world. So those ladies are just silly." Margaret pulled her into a hug, blinking back tears. Those moments, those quiet afternoons teaching Emma to read with recipe cards, to count with spoons of sugar, became her anchor. But outside that little world, the whispers grew crueler. It happened one Sunday. Callum had ridden to town for a meeting, leaving Margaret and Emma behind. A few ranch hands lingered near the barn, drinking. Margaret crossed the yard with a basket of herbs when one of them, a new hire, barely 20, called out, "Hey, cook." His grin was lopsided. "Me. You feed the boss special too, or just the rest of us?" The laughter came in waves. Margaret froze. Her whole body went cold. She turned slowly, her voice shaking. "You mind your manners, boy." He stepped closer, the grin widening. "Didn't mean no harm. Just wondering what keeps a man like Thorne so quiet these days. Maybe it's your biscuits, or your bed." The slap came before she realized her hand had moved. Silence. Then the young man stumbled back, red blooming on his cheek. From the bunkhouse porch, an older hand stood. "You best walk away, kid." But the damage was done. The yard was buzzing. By the time Callum returned that evening, every man knew. He found her in the cookhouse, scrubbing the same pot over and over. Her eyes were swollen, her shoulders stiff. "Margaret," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "I'm fine." "You're not." Her hands trembled. "They talk like I'm something to laugh at. Like I don't belong here. I came to work, Callum. To cook. To earn my keep. Not to be gossiped about." He stepped closer. "You don't deserve this." She turned then, her voice breaking. "They think because I'm alone, because I'm me, that it's open season. That I should be grateful for scraps of kindness." Callum's jaw clenched. "No one will talk that way about you again." She shook her head. "You can't stop them." He was silent for a long time. Then, softly, "There's one way." Her eyes met his. "Marry me." The words landed like thunder in the small room. She stared at him, speechless. "People will keep talking until they have a reason not to," he said. "You deserve peace, Margaret. You've earned it." Her breath hitched. "You don't mean that." "I do." Tears welled in her eyes, part disbelief, part heartbreak. "Callum, Don't do this because you pity me. I'm not here to marry. I just want to cook. The silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Finally, Callum nodded slowly. And I'll make sure you can do it without shame. He turned and walked out, his boots echoing on the porch. Margaret stood there, the room spinning softly around her. The next morning, she rose before dawn. The fire crackled to life, and soon the smell of fresh bread filled the air. The men filed in, quieter than usual. The young one she'd slapped avoided her eyes. Margaret served each plate steadily, her chin high. Not one word left her mouth, but her silence spoke louder than any retort. By evening, the whispers had died. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Callum came by. The air was cool, the porch lantern swaying in the breeze. Margaret was wiping down the counter when his shadow crossed the doorway. "You still awake?" She looked up, startled. "Couldn't sleep." He stepped inside, hat in hand. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt thick, heavy with things unsaid. "I should have been here." "You can't be everywhere," she said simply. "Besides, I handled it." His eyes met hers then, steady, searching. "You did. Better than most men I know would have." Margaret blinked, uncertain what to say. He went on quietly, "You've got more backbone than anyone gives you credit for, Margaret. And I want you to know, you've got my respect. You always did. But after today, I think everyone else finally sees what I've known all along." Something in her chest loosened, just a little. "Thank you, Callum." He nodded, his eyes softening before he turned toward the door. "Don't let them break your spirit. This ranch is better because you're here." Then he put his hat back on and walked into the night. The town social came once a month, filling the church hall with fiddle music and the smell of coffee and pie. This time, Callum insisted that Margaret and Emma come along. Margaret hesitated at the bottom of the wagon step, smoothing her plain dress. "I don't belong there." Callum stood beside her, sleeves rolled and hat in hand. "You belong wherever you decide to walk through the door," he said, then added with quiet finality, "and I'd be proud to walk in with you." Emma tugged her hand, eyes bright. "Please, Miss Margaret, I want to show everyone the cookies we made." Margaret's resistance cracked. "All right, sweetheart." They rode in silence at first, the lantern swinging above them. From the ridge, the town glowed warm against the dark hills. When they reached the church, Callum offered his arm. She hesitated only a second before taking it. Inside, the piano played a lively tune, but when they stepped through the doorway, the room stilled. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. Margaret's face flushed hot, but Callum's palms stayed steady at her back, guiding her forward as if nothing in the world were amiss. Near the refreshment table, a cluster of ladies whispered behind their gloved hands. The same women who'd laughed the day Margaret first arrived now stood frozen between curiosity and judgment. One stepped forward, her smile thin as glass. "Margaret, what a surprise to see you here." Before Margaret could answer, Callum's voice carried, calm and solid. "Mrs. Thornhill invited her." The woman blinked. "Your mother?" "She wanted to meet the woman who's been helping with Emma." A lie, but a graceful one. It hung in the air like a shield. Emma piped up, lifting her basket. "Miss Margaret made cookies. Want to try one?" "Caught," the woman accepted. Her polite bite turned into an involuntary hum of pleasure. "Why, that's lovely." "She taught me to make them," Emma said proudly. More townsfolk gathered. One by one, they tasted the cookies, their faces softening as sweetness replaced scorn. Someone asked for the recipe, someone else laughed and said, "That's the best thing I've eaten since Christmas." Margaret didn't glow or boast. She only smiled politely, her shoulders drawn back, letting the food speak for her. The bunkhouse men showed up late, scrubbed and uncomfortable in stiff collars. The older hand who'd once defended her tipped his hat. "Evening, ma'am." "Evening," she answered quietly. Their respect wasn't loud, but it was visible, and others noticed. A merchant drifted over to Callum. "Thornhill, your crew won't stop talking about their cook. Where'd you find her?" "Right here in town," Callum said. "Best decision I ever made." The merchant looked Margaret over with new eyes. "Would you cater my daughter's wedding?" Margaret blinked. I'm not sure I'm qualified." "She'll think about it," Callum said smoothly. The man nodded, already convinced. By mid-evening, Margaret's table was the busiest corner of the hall. Laughter circled her like a gentle tide. Some of it was genuine, some only polite. But for the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. As the crowd thinned and the lanterns burned lower, Margaret slipped outside for air. The night was cool, the streets silver under moonlight. She leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. Bootsteps sounded behind her. "Didn't see you leave," Callum said. "I needed a minute." He joined her at the rail, folding his arms. "You did well in there." She gave a small laugh. "All I did was bake cookies." "That's not all you did." His voice softened. "You walked in there and made them see you for who you are." Margaret looked out toward the hills, her throat tight. "They only looked because I came with you." He shook his head. "No. They looked because you've earned it. You've worked harder than anyone on my land, and you did it without asking a thing in return." Her eyes stung. "I've spent so long being a joke, Callum. I don't know what to do when people stop laughing." He turned toward her. "You hold your head high and let them wonder how they ever missed your worth." For a long moment, neither spoke. The music drifted faintly from the hall, the fiddle slow now, almost tender. Callum's hand brushed hers on the railing, not deliberate, just there. "I meant what I said before, Margaret. You belong here." She drew a steadying breath. "Maybe, but belonging and being wanted aren't the same thing." He hesitated, eyes searching hers, then said quietly, "Then maybe the rest of us need to catch up to what you already are." Something inside her twisted, an ache that was half hope, half fear. The door creaked open behind them. "Papa! Miss Margaret!" Emma came bounding out, cheeks flushed from dancing. "They're playing my favorite song. Come back inside." Callum straightened, clearing his throat. "We'll be right there, sweetheart." Emma grabbed each of their hands. "Come on. You both look too serious." Margaret laughed, the tension breaking. Together they walked back into the light and music. The night ended with laughter and clapping as the last song faded. On the ride home, Emma fell asleep against Margaret's shoulder, her curls warm against Margaret's neck. The road stretched silver under the moon. Callum held the reins loosely, glancing over now and then. "Thank you for coming tonight." She smiled faintly. "Thank you for making me." Silence settled, easy this time. The wagon wheels hummed over the dirt. At the ranch gate, Callum stopped the horses and looked out toward the dark fields. "You changed things tonight," he said. "Not just for them, for me too." And for the first time, Margaret didn't shrink from the thought of being seen. She simply let herself exist, steady, strong, and shining in the hush between two hearts that hadn't yet spoken what both already knew. Word of Margaret's cooking had traveled beyond the Thorne Ranch, beyond the town. By midsummer, it had reached the county fair committee, who announced a cooking competition with a prize of $200, a sum that made the entire county stir with excitement. Callum leaned against the wagon, hat in hand, glancing at Margaret. "You should enter." Margaret froze, fingers tightening around her basket. "I'm not a competitor. I just cook." "You're not just a cook," Callum said firmly. "You're the best in 3 counties. You deserve to be recognized." Emma tugged at her sleeve, eyes bright. Please, Miss Margaret? I want everyone to know how amazing you are. Margaret looked down at the little girl who had become the center of her heart, the reason she kept showing up every day, even when the world whispered that she didn't belong. Her lips curved into a small, reluctant smile. All right, sweetheart. We'll enter. The day of the fair dawned bright and clear. Margaret arrived with Callum and Emma, carrying baskets of her mother's treasured recipes, honey lavender bread, rosemary roasted chicken, and a perfectly spiced apple cinnamon pie. Simple, yet flawless, each dish a quiet echo of the home she'd left behind, now perfected through patience and love. The other contestants were mostly women from town, many of them the same who had mocked her, their whispers now folded beneath brittle smiles. Margaret, one said, voice dripping with forced sweetness. How brave of you to enter. Margaret set her dishes on the judging table without a word. Her focus was unwavering, her posture calm, almost regal. She didn't need to argue or explain. Her work spoke for her. The judges moved along the line, tasting each dish in measured silence. When they reached Margaret's table, the head judge, a stern older man famed for his impossible standards, took a bite of her honey lavender bread. Another. His brows knit, then relaxed. He tried the chicken, savoring the rosemary and juices. Finally, he reached for the pie. The flavors danced on his tongue. He set down his fork, eyes lifting to hers. Who taught you to cook like this? My mother, sir, Margaret said simply. She taught you well, he murmured, nodding once, impressed. While the judges deliberated, the town women clustered near her table again, murmuring among themselves. It's not fair, one whispered, audible enough for Margaret to hear. She has nothing else. Of course she's good at this. Some people are born for the kitchen, another agreed. It's all they'll ever have. Emma, standing beside Margaret, lifted her chin. Miss Margaret has us. And that's more than you'll ever have. The women's faces reddened, a flush of embarrassment replacing their sneers. Margaret didn't look at them. She placed her hands lightly over Emma's and smiled down at her. Thank you, sweetheart, she whispered. The head judge stepped up to the platform, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The winner of this year's cooking competition is Margaret Bellamy. A hush fell, then broke into an eruption of applause. Callum moved to her side immediately, pulling her into a hug. Emma jumped up and down beside them, squealing with delight. Margaret laughed, the sound full and free, her eyes shining with tears. The women who had mocked her froze, their expressions tight with disbelief. For once, there were no words to throw. No scorn could stand against what was real, what had been earned. That evening, the town gathered for the winner's feast. Margaret prepared the meal herself, her hands steady and sure, the kitchen alive with the aroma of roasted chicken, simmering pies, and freshly baked bread. She worked quietly, pouring care and patience into every dish, her heart lifting with each satisfied glance from a guest. Callum stood, glass raised. The hall quieted, every eye turning to him. I'd like to say something, he began, voice warm and resonant. 3 months ago, he continued, I had hired Margaret to feed my ranch hands, thinking I was merely filling their stomachs. But what I found was far more. A woman who brought light back into the life of a little girl, who transformed a house into a home, and who reminded everyone, that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's made of flour, patience, and the courage to keep showing up even when the world tells you not to. He walked slowly toward her, eyes soft and unwavering. Margaret Bellamy, will you marry me? The hall held its breath. Some were shocked, some joyous, but every eye followed her. Margaret's chest tightened, tears streaming freely now. She looked at Emma first, whose grin was brighter than any ribbon or medal. She looked at Callum, steady and hopeful. and she felt the weight of every hardship, every whispered joke, every moment she had been unseen, and realized she was ready. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. The hall erupted. Callum bent, kissing her gently in front of everyone, tender and full of promise. Emma cheered louder than anyone, laughter ringing over the applause. Margaret laughed too, a laugh that carried all her years of invisibility into something visible, cherished, undeniable. 6 months later, Margaret stood in the expanded cookhouse, now a small cafe attached to the ranch. People arrived from miles around for her food. The little cafe bustled with warmth and light, a place where strangers became friends and every meal carried the comfort of home. Emma worked beside her, kneading dough, asking questions, laughing like she hadn't a care in the world. Margaret smiled down at her, pride swelling in her chest. Callum appeared in the doorway, his presence calm, grounding. "Busy day?" "Always," Margaret said, wiping her hands on her apron. He crossed to her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Any regrets?" She looked around, at Emma, flour dusting her curls, at the patrons, smiling and chatting, at the man who had seen her when no one else did. "Not a single one," she said firmly. He kissed her forehead, soft and sure. "Good. Because I'm not letting you go." Emma called out, arms full of pastry. "Papa! Miss Margaret! Come taste this." The three of them walked together, a family built not on blood but on choice, on patience, on courage, and the quiet certainty that sometimes love finds you in a kitchen, wrapped in the smell of rising bread and the laughter of a little girl who just wanted someone to see her. And Margaret, the woman who had been invisible for so long, had finally found her place. Not as a joke, not as a burden, but as someone essential, someone loved, someone home. What part of Margaret's story touched you the most? Comment below. I'd love to hear your favorite moment. If you enjoyed Margaret's journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that lift the soul.